Hi there, and welcome to Let's Slow Down, a podcast for all of you who feel tired and stressed from this overwhelming world. Here we'll have fun, inspiring conversations about living life on our own terms and explore ways to ease the pace of our modern world, because life really is good when you're relaxed enough to be present for it. I'm your host, Anne-Marie Stolting, and I welcome you to this space where I hope to inspire you to slow down, because life is too short to let it go by in a blur. So take a deep breath, relax, and enjoy the show. Welcome to another episode of the Let's Slow Down podcast. Today's guest is Lisa DeAngelis. She's an author, speaker, and holistic change practitioner. Lisa lives in New York City and works professionally in private personal management. She's committed to leading authentically and living with intention. As a certified teacher of the Alexander Technique since 2009, she has worked with an extensive clientele of musicians, actors, athletes, and medical and business professionals. She's coached women through personal and career transitions, supporting them in embracing change and living their best lives. She's also the author of Embracing the Unknown, Exploring the Pathways to Change. Welcome to Let's Slow Down, Lisa.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. It's truly a pleasure to be here with you.
Same here. I'm so glad that we've connected and we have a lot in common. So we'll get into that during our conversation today. To start with, I think it's so interesting that we're both musicians. So Lisa didn't know that I was also a musician until just a minute ago. I have not had many musicians on the podcast, so this is kind of cool. We're going to have a lot to talk about. And you had a really pivotal moment early in your musical career. And it sounds, just from reading your book, really sounds like it sparked a lot of what you do now. Set you on a different path than I think you initially started on, which happens to so many of us. So can you give our listeners some background on your story?
I'd love to. And yes, what you just said makes me laugh a little bit, because sometimes I will say to people, my life has been a series of best laid plans that has not, in fact, gone according to best laid plans.
And I'm sure so many people are like, yeah, I get that, and are nodding in agreement.
There were so many moments where I sit around and think to myself, I didn't choose this. How did I get here? And so there's a really interesting perspective piece when we can look back at our journeys in any given moment and just take a second to reflect, because I think it does give us chances to see things through new eyes and look at them from different perspectives. I do have a background as a musician, and it's funny because I've thought about this a lot when people say, "Oh, are you a musician?" Often my response is, "Oh, I'm a former singer," or sometimes I'll joke that I'm a reformed singer. But really, the truth of it is, I don't do music anymore, but I am a musician, because what it means to carry these traits, to be defined by these things, are pieces of you that just continue adding on. We don't stop being something when we walk away from, even whether it's a hobby or a profession, and move into something else. We don't truly leave things behind. They just build in and sort of adds to the depth and dimension that we can bring to any situation. So I love looking at my story through that lens, because stepping back about 22 years at this point, I was a young, bright-eyed 18-year-old singer who was ending my first semester in college, getting ready to do the end of the semester juries, which, as a musician, you may know, is a very high intense pressure situation.
Sure is.
To get up in front of the whole faculty and perform. And as an 18-year-old who's still trying to find your way, it's just all really overwhelming. And leading up to that point, I started having tremendous jaw problems. My jaw was starting to lock. I was starting to get really uncomfortable and carrying a lot of stress in my body when I was singing. And obviously, it didn't feel good. So that winter, when I went home for the holiday break, I said to my mom, "I'm really having these problems. My jaw's starting to lock and crack funny, and it just doesn't feel good." And she said, "I think we should see a specialist," who, to my complete surprise and shock and horror, frankly, suggested that I might need reconstructive jaw surgery to determine what was happening, because he surmised that there was something wrong with the disc on one side of my jaw. And I've pieced together over the years, I had a bit of an injury when I was about a year and a half old, and I fell down a flight of stairs and hit my chin. And I think at that point,
Wow.
he just dislodged my jaw just enough.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
our bodies are so amazing. They heal themselves tremendously, but it just kind of couldn't heal itself fully. And so I was dealing with some of the shifts and changes that happened as I was an adult, and frankly, overusing my jaw in a way that I didn't realize at the time. So in that moment where this specialist said to me, "Oh, you might need reconstructive jaw surgery," I had a really interesting movie moment, as I call it, because it felt like everything stopped. The room went quiet, and I just felt very, very deeply, no, no, that's not right. That's not what you should be doing. And I really don't think I had ever heard my inner voice so strongly and so clearly before.
Wow.
And so I just said, okay, no, we're not going to do that. And I don't know how to fix this problem. And I don't know what happens here from now, but we'll figure something out. And that was really a catalyst that led me on all sorts of different explorations. One of
And
them,
that's like such a mature thing, just realization to come to at, you said 18. I mean,
yeah,
that's a lot. That's a lot.
it almost felt out of body. It almost felt like it wasn't fully me because I didn't have the skills to know. And of course, sitting there in a room with someone who's an expert who should know the quote right thing to do, it felt strange to get such a strong no. But of course, just thinking about the repercussions of such a big surgery like that, when I really didn't need it. And that was the interesting piece about it. But fast forward, I did actually encounter a teacher of the Alexander technique, which I later went on to study and become certified in myself. But the fascinating part about meeting her and her work was she actually didn't work on my jaw. She started working on how I was standing, how I was sitting, what I was doing with my feet. And I kept thinking, aren't you listening to me? The jaw is the problem. But surprise, surprise, to Lisa, the jaw was not the problem. The jaw was just a really loud symptom of some things about my body I had been ignoring. And so part of the interesting piece of that process of figuring all of this out was actually learning to slow down and not say the loudest symptom is always what needs the most attention. Sometimes we have to take the opposite approach and say, I hear you, loud symptom. And is there anything else going on right now that might be contributing to the challenges I'm having, or that might allow me to see this through a slightly wider perspective that might give me some more insights? And so that process really, really shifted everything for me because it did not cure my jaw problem. I still have the issue in my jaw to this day, but my body has learned in healthy ways and sustainable ways how to work with it, how to navigate around it and create the most out of the situation I have. No one's body is perfect. None of us have any situations in our life that are absolutely 100% quote in the right place. But the skill comes in figuring out how to put it all together and really create an environment, an ecosystem, if you will, where we can thrive as an individual, whether that's at the body level, whether that's at the professional level, whether that's at a relational level with the people we have in our lives. So I think that becomes a really interesting way to approach whatever we want to in our lives and in our world, is to say, what happens if we actually take a pause, step back, and look at this through a different lens so we can actually see what we have going on here? And most of the time, we have way more at our fingertips available to us than we realize on a first glance.
100%. And I think that we are all just kind of programmed, and we learn over the years to just push through. Oh, your jaw's bothering you? Well, just push through. Take some Advil, keep going. You still have to practice however many. And when you're in college, you still got to sing 5 hours, 6 hours a day. You push through. And if we're not careful, we can push through months, years, careers that we don't even want to be in, lives that we don't even want to be in. And I think there is so much power in just, like you said, just slowing down a little bit. It might not be easy. It might feel like we are going to be behind, but no, because then you're going to be on the path that you need to be on, that you're made to be on. Otherwise, maybe you're not quote unquote behind, but you're going somewhere you don't want to go. And I feel like that's been a big aha for me in my life as well. That's, why I started this podcast, why I'm so passionate about this subject and living intentionally and just simplifying things so that the big stuff shines and that the big stuff's obvious and that I have enough time and room and energy to notice what those big things are, because it can kind of all get cloudy and messy and noisy and you don't even know. Like there's so much going on, you don't even know what the important things are kind of to pull out of because there's just so much. So for you being 18 years old and then learning this the hard way in some ways really is inspiring. And I can tell you've just grown so much since then. And it's just so interesting. I want to hear more about this Alexander technique. And I definitely will get into that a little bit because I know that you're certified and you work with people on that all the time. And I want to go back and I love that you highlight living with intention in your bio. You mentioned that you talk about it, something that I've been passionate about for the same reasons. As I started to slow down, I realized some of these things that I'm doing, I don't really want to do. Like, I'm not even sure. Somebody along the way told me I should, or maybe I thought in my head that I should. Who those people are, I don't know. I don't even want to be doing these things. These things aren't even serving me. So that intention piece is, to me, it's just so important. It's so impactful. It wasn't until I realized I was going through the motions completely on autopilot, which is something that you talk about in your book, that I recognized the need for change in my own life. And I do want to I pulled a little quote because I loved it. In Embracing the Unknown, you speak to all this and you say, running on autopilot, one day we wake up to realize we've started to rust because we're not changing. That's a powerful image to me. Mm-hmm. You say that everyone thinks change is what happens to us or something we do. Change is a choice. It's about rediscovering the optimal tools and conditions for changing, adopting them as a mindset, and living them as intentional choices. And I thought that was really beautifully put and just so well said. It really made me stop and think. I was highlighting that one in the book. And for me, there's been many moments in my life, but one of them was a few years ago when my oldest daughter started high school. And it really stopped me in my tracks. And now my middle one is starting high school next year. So I'm kind of going through this again. And I was like, how is this even possible? I honestly had no idea how I had gotten here. And now she's only got 1 year left. She's almost done. And I was like, this has been such a blur. I feel like I'm in a cartoon and I'm the road runner or something. All I see is a whoosh, like a blur of the last decade, maybe more. Mm-hmm. And it was very scary to me. It made me stop. It made me stop and think things have to change. I had to really do a lot of soul searching myself, take a lot of time to just sit with my thoughts, figure them out, weed out the important stuff, and start making some changes. So all of this that you write about is just, to me, so powerful and so helpful. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about the autopilot and then getting out of it, because it's not easy.
It is not easy. And I love what you said. Thank you so much for sharing your own version of that story with me. When you say that, the question for me of what really is our goal, right? What is our goal in any given moment? What is our goal long term? And we talk a lot about being goal oriented and action, or, all of this language really deals with goals as the things we do. Mm-hmm. But for me, I've really dived into this idea that what if my goal is to be present, to be whole, and to be available, frankly. And if we think about what the opposite of those things are, it would be disconnected, scattered, or disjointed, right? And closed off. And that's how a lot of people move through the world, in isolation, stuck in devices, not noticing anything around them. And it creates something interesting for us as individuals when we're sort of literally have blinders on, when we're sort of blinding ourselves from seeing the whole picture. But this idea of being available is really interesting to me as a piece of what intention really is. Because I could be really intentional in my own life, in my own world, and in my own circle. But part of intention is the interaction we have with other people. Because our whole world, we are relational beings.
Mm-hmm.
We cannot avoid interacting with people as much as some of us might try or get frustrated.
Yeah, it's true. It's definitely challenging, but it's also the number one indicator of happiness, they say. Human connection. It's so important.
It's so important. And I think the real trap is trying to always retrofit ourselves into a box that doesn't fit us. And I have a joke sometimes when I'm working with people that the world is designed for the average person, of which no one actually is.
Yeah.
We're all a little bit taller, a little bit shorter, a little bit this, a little bit that. And the world is not designed for any of us. And if we look at people, I'm sure you've heard these stories of people that are very tall that raise their cabinets, do these things because their body actually hurts trying to accommodate to a smaller size. Well, we hurt. We hurt when we are constantly trying to force ourselves into boxes where we don't fit.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens if we just get rid of the boxes? What happens if we blow open all of those constraints that we think are imposed on us, question all of the shoulds, and actually come back to the situation and saying, what does it feel like? What does it really feel like to stop and let this be seen? All of the things around us, all of our circumstances, all of our questions, all of the potential answers. And I think intention is grabbing on to then what really truly calls to us. And that can be a very, very powerful reclamation.
And I think some people don't even realize, I know I didn't, that I was even trying to fit into a box. You don't even realize it's happening. You just don't. And if you don't stop for a little bit and just think about what it is that's going on and how it's making you feel and what you're doing, where you're putting that energy, you might never realize that you've been doing that long. And it's exhausting. It is so exhausting trying to fit yourself into a mold that you're never going to fit. So, then you have burnout. I feel like their autopilot and burnout are hand in hand, right?
Absolutely. So for me, the biggest thing is to just look at this layer of awareness and choice. And when people say, but I didn't have a choice, I always push back to say, is that really the case? Did we really not have a choice in a situation? Or was it just something that was going to make us uncomfortable, something we knew was going to be hard? There are situations when we feel very backed into corners, right? Mm-hmm. We don't have a choice. But what if we moved into it? What if we leaned into the thing that feels uncomfortable, that feels scary, that feels fearful in any given moment? That's a choice too. And I think the more we remind ourselves that even when it doesn't seem like it, there are options around us if we just give it a second and let our eyes adjust to the dark, which is something we forget. Because all of us get into a dark room and panic and say, I can't see. What am I going to do? So I think a big piece of that for me is winding all of this back, which, as you sort of alluded to already, this is really countercultural. And I think we have to be really easy with ourselves. We have to give ourselves a lot of grace and compassion to recognize that this isn't always easy to do. It is like swimming upstream sometimes when we're fighting against a current that is giving us such strong messaging of now, fast, more, and you're not enough. But again, those are words. Words have power. And there are other words available. Words like intention, words like pause, words like look around, where we can take those opportunities to actually see what we see and actually decide what we want to choose.
I love that. It's so true. And, you were going back to, you were talking about goals. You were saying, what is the goal? And I was going to say mine is to be more present and to be present. And you took the words right out of my mouth. Because when we are present, when we're truly present, we can't be on autopilot. I learned that. Like, I can't be on autopilot. If I am where my feet are and I'm really owning it and feeling it, it forces me to be in the moment. And I find that I can always find something that I'm grateful for, no matter what the circumstance. I mean,
Mhm.
sometimes you got to grasp at straws, but you can always find something, even in a really tough time. There is something, and it could be as simple as a cup of coffee to be drinking at the moment, or it can be so little. It can be so little, but
And I
it
think
all changes everything, right?
it does. It totally does. And I think you bring up an important topic here that might be worth speaking to for a moment, to say, for people who say, what does it mean to be present? How do I actually find presence? Because for some people, that's very elusive. And I want to start by saying that's not any of our fault. We have not been taught. We have not been taught how to be present. And being present is a skill that we develop because it is the practice of tapping into what is available to us through our senses at any given time. That's presence. To be with our senses is something we can only do in a present moment. We can have memories associated with pictures, with smells, with all of these things, but to truly be present with current moment sensation is the act and the practice of being present. And so for people who say, I don't know how to do that, or I struggle with finding that, it doesn't mean you have to sit and meditate for 3 hours. It doesn't mean you have to have a quiet mind or. Sometimes it's just actually looking around and asking yourself if you're seeing anything. We look a lot, but do we see?
Right.
I can't tell you how many times I've walked around and realized, oh, that's a really beautiful tree. Oh my gosh, when did that flower pop up? That is the prettiest color green I've ever seen. Whatever these things are, that it is very easy to miss, because even though we might be looking, we might not be seeing. And there's, I think, an important distinction there for people who might say, how do I get a little closer to finding presence or connecting in with presence?
That tree that you talked about, you may have walked past it 100 times and just never noticed it because you
Yes.
were on autopilot. So, yeah, I think that we miss out on so much beauty in so many moments and in our world. And we're, constantly we're stressed out about something, we're worried. I know for me, like future worry, I tend to always just go there, and I'm like, stop, because now I'm missing the here and now. And I think that that's just how I'm wired. So I've had to work very hard to try to, I guess fight's not the right word, but to try to stay in the moment and to not always let my head get away from me and then make me miss out on what's happening right now. Because there are, as I said, with children, you blink and they're all of a sudden teenagers and going off to college and things like that. You don't want to miss those. It's those like regular everyday moments. It's those trees that we're walking by together that make up a life that you remember and that is valuable to you. And I think those little moments are the most important ones that add so much value and joy and give us a lot of peace. We all
Absolutely.
deserve inner peace, and it's hard to find, but I think that that's one way to do it, to be present.
Absolutely. And so this is a really great segue, actually, for the Alexander technique, because in a very, very brief nutshell, that's the goal, is to regain presence through our body. So we have a choice about how we use the vehicle of our body as we show up in the world. And that's
That's
very broad.
amazing.
So I'll give
Okay,
you a
tell us
few
more.
more. I'll give you a few more specific applications of that. But one of the biggest challenges that people will come to me with, and have come to me with over the years, but I don't think it was the same. Our language has shifted culturally. The words we're using are actually, this is something I learned a number of years ago, is that language is the first way that things culturally start to shift. So you'll notice that different groups of people start using language, and then 5 or 10 years later, all of a sudden, it becomes a cultural phenomenon that everyone just adopts those language.
Interesting.
And that's how change sort of takes place on larger cultural scales. So this has been happening for a while with the individuals that I've worked with, but it's been different. But this idea of people seeking to find presence and calm in and with their bodies has been pervasive, because I've had people come to me in pain. I've had people come to me in stress and looking to alleviate their stress. And then I have people coming to enhance performance in whatever area they work. And as a musician, you can probably understand your physical posture is so important for how your instrument literally communicates with the world. And if a musician is not at their fullest posture, they can't breathe as well as they should, and the sound changes. That's true if you're a singer, a string player, a wind player, a brass player, any type of musician, a pianist. And people will sort of get confused about that. But when I could do actual next to, side-by-side examples of people, as their body shifts, their sound changes because the body is a vehicle. It comes through us. And the same is true if you're an athlete. Learning how to be ready to respond to a stimulus. Think of a baseball player, for instance, waiting for the ball to get hit off of the bat and field a ground ball. If we are waiting with a certain level of readiness in our body, readiness for action that's too activated, we actually can't move as fast as when we know how to get our body back to a more balanced state and be ready for result. So that is a learned skill that is applied through a series of principles. And these principles are about the way we think and how that affects our physical body actions. Because the body's timeless. The body just carries what it carries, and our brain and our bodies are intertwined, but they don't always communicate as fluidly as they should. So the Alexander technique is really about working with people to apply a set of principles of conscious change. So we're really aware of what we're doing. That can be applied in whatever area somebody wishes to enhance for their lives. And like I said, that can be a physical pain issue, that can be a performance-related issue, or it can just simply be wanting to be more calm, more present in your body, because that is not something we're taught. So we consider the Alexander technique a re-education method. No one ever teaches us how to walk. Think about it. What did you say to your kids when they were learning how to walk? Nobody says, lift your weight, lift your knee. Nothing like that. We say, come on, you can do it. And the body figures it out. But how often do we go back and say, exactly, did I learn how to walk? We don't.
No, never.
We never revisit it. So the question becomes, what benefit could we give ourselves if we take the opportunity through a totally differently formed adult conscious brain, conscious mind, and say, what if we actually peeled this back and said, what am I doing when I walk? What am I doing when I sit or play my instrument or work all day? I can't tell you how many people have come to me and said, oh, I don't use my body for work. And I'll say, what do you do? They say, I just sit at a computer all day. But that is actually what we think. We think we don't use our body when it's not right. And we're actually using our body in a more potentially detrimental way all of the time if we're not aware that we're sitting there hunched over and compressed all day. That's not healthy for our system.
No. And it also takes a lot of energy. I literally just had this conversation with my daughter the other day. She took the SATs for the first time while I was in a 3-hour rehearsal playing my clarinet. So we were both in two different places, but we were sitting and we were extremely focused for several hours each.
Yes.
And, the Fitbit says I got 0 steps, right? Because I wasn't walking around. I was sitting there, but I notice this every time I have a long rehearsal. I'm starving by the end of it, and I'm exhausted because I am so uber focused for several hours, and there's very few moments throughout my week other than that I have to be that focused for that amount of time. And I love it. But it's exhausting. And it really, you have to step back and think for a minute, like, yeah, it is actually quite a lot of strain on your body, even though you are, quote unquote, just sitting there, right?
And it's a trap to think that there is, and my joke before about the world is, made for the average person, of which no one is. It's a joke to think that there is a perfect posture. It's a joke to think that there is one right way to do anything. The whole gift of presence is being able to get yourself back to where you want to be. There's a lot of work going around about nervous system regulation right now, which I think is a brilliant trend, speaking of changing trends in the culture. And I myself have been working with some mentors in somatic trauma healing for the last 3.5 years. And it's completely changed all of my life in countless ways, more than I could even express. But it's a falsity to think that the goal is to be calm all the time, or the goal is to always be regulated. That's not the goal. But the goal is to be able to get back to a regulated state. We are never not going to be activated. In fact, I hope we are all activated by crazy, wild joy or surprise or excitement. I mean, the disappointment, the sadness, that kind of activation is not as pleasant in the moment. But we are all going to be wildly activated over the course of our lives. The goal is that we don't get stuck. And that's the goal in general, is not getting stuck. People joke with me all the time, oh, so you never slouch, you never. I said, of course I get home and I completely slouch into my couch and I catch myself in the most horrible body positions ever. But the gift is I can get out of it when I want to. And that is what some of us have lost. And the goal is to regain that skill, not of keeping it, not of holding on to something, but being able to get it back. Being able to be in a cycle where we can always get back to where we choose. And that for me is a really, really stark shift in how we approach something. And I am a very type A person. I used to joke that I was a type A plus because, I overachieve with everything. But I have really shed a lot of that. This is the first year that I actually didn't set any goals. I didn't have anything on my list of things I had to achieve for this year, which has been entirely activating for me personally in a different way because I've never had that. That's always driven my impetus to be moving forward and how I'm moving forward and why I'm moving forward. But what happens when I have a year where I don't have that as the driver? And I want to make an important distinction. It doesn't mean I won't achieve anything. It doesn't mean goals won't arise and dreams.
Oh, you'll probably achieve more. I bet you'll achieve more.
Achieve more, right? One might surmise. But the interesting piece about it is I'm not letting that drive the bus. And that has been happening for so many years without even realizing it. But the perception then is that I am going, quote, slower than other people, which can be really unnerving when you think I'm behind. This is happening too slowly. I want it to be faster. But these same mentors I was mentioning before had a saying that happened. They said once, and I sort of thought, no, I don't believe that. But it's become something I really have kind of leaned into. And it was that slow is smooth and smooth is fast. The goal is, yes, I know, right? And I had to sit with that for a little while. It didn't make sense to me because I thought, no, fast is fast. But the truth of the matter is, when we go slow, it can be smooth. And when it's smooth, then it can go really fast. And that just might be a really interesting key. An advocate for slowing down to sort of say what actually happens when we can slow it down to a pace where it's sustainable. Because that's what's going to create traction. We all know the story of the tortoise and the hare, and that there's a reason that fable existed. But I still don't think anybody was really sitting around going, oh, let me go be that tortoise.
Right. It's so true. Wow. It makes you think, right? There's so much truth to it, and it's very powerful. And we can all slow down. We can do it. It might be a little out of our comfort zone, might be a little bit hard, but we can all do it. And it's so interesting how this Alexander technique really teaches all this. There are so many courses these kids are required to take to graduate from high school. Like, I wish they all had to have a semester of this because it would help everyone. It would help everyone.
Well, and Anne-Marie, that really is what my book turned into. This is not the book I started writing. I was writing a very different book about the moments in our lives when we make choices that we have change that results out of that. I was really interested in those pivotal moments where we make choices that result in change. But this book really became an exploration for me of what it means to change. And looking at these principles of the Alexander technique applied to the physical body, I had a moment many years ago when I thought, oh my gosh, if I can change the way my body exists in the world and what it's capable of doing, what else is possible? And so this became a way for me to say these principles aren't just about changing the way you physically hold your posture in the world. This is about how to change anything, because sustainable change is something that's a cycle. It's a process. It's not checkboxes. So the more that we can come back to this idea of what are the principles we're looking at here, not what are the things I'm doing, what are the questions I'm asking myself? That is actually what drives change. And you're absolutely right. I've thought about this so many times. Why aren't these skills we're trying to teach young people? And what are those skills? Because it's a little abstract to say, let's teach people how to change. But navigating change does have tools that we can develop. And they're tools we all actually have already. We just need to strengthen and hone, maybe practice using a little bit. But being adaptable, being resilient, having courage, that is one of the biggest things we can do to support ourselves always is lean into the places where we feel fear, and not just the feel fear and do it anyway. It's resting into this idea that we have inherent courage in taking these steps forward that are sometimes tiptoes, that are huge, huge leaps when we look back. So before anyone says, oh, I have trouble being resilient, or I have trouble, we've all done these things. And kids are actually a perfect example. How many times when they're learning how to ride a bike, did they fall off and get right back on? Sometimes it just makes them even more excited or interested in completing this process, right? But there is this interesting space of saying these intangible things are kind of hard to get at, but we all have them. So let's strengthen them together and remind ourselves that we're all doing this. We're all figuring it out.
So true.
You and Marie are not the only one that struggles with this. I mean, I will sit here and it will be like, I am in the club. This stinks. And I do not always gracefully navigate change. 100%. In fact, they say the book you write is probably the book you most need to read. So
Yep. Fine. Yep. And mine is called Let's Slow Down. So yes, I'm in that club.
Exactly. So I do think there is an element of that would be great. I love though that some high schools are starting to incorporate some more quiet stillness meditation or yoga movement type practices, because this idea that stopping is bad is not a healthy thing, because there can be so much restoration in pause.
Yeah.
The idea that getting enough sleep isn't a priority for so many people. It's another version of how we slow down, is actually letting ourselves rest when we need rest. And we forget that an important part of any cycle is the part where we integrate, is the part where we restore, is the part where we get ready to go back and do it again. We cannot always be in action mode. We have to be in restoration mode as well. And so it's a great opportunity to look at your life or your day and say, relatively speaking, how much of my time am I in action mode, and how much am I restoring myself? An analogy I love to use is sort of the bank analogy. I have a lovely friend with 3 kids, and they're very intentional parents. I've always appreciated this about them. But I remember years ago, I was speaking with her at the end of the day, and she said, it's been a really hard day. I've been just struggling with the kids. And I said, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. And she said, no, it's actually really my fault. I realized that I was just asking for withdrawals from their bank all day long, and I didn't make very many deposits. And she said, so how can I possibly expect them to show up in the way I'm asking when they're totally overdrawn?
Yeah.
And I think it's a great question for ourselves, is how much have we withdrawn from our own bank balance that day? And what have we done to restore it?
Yeah. And the more we're withdrawing, the more time it's going to take to put it back. Oh, if we've, those people who are on all the time, so crazy busy, don't have an extra 5 minutes in their day, they need major time to rest, restorative rest, not just sit and scroll for an hour and think, oh, I just rested for an hour. so different. They need intentional rest. They need like solid, true rest. And I mean, I've noticed, I've learned it. I've seen it with my own children, especially when they were little. You see it in a baby. They don't get their sleep and they are a different person, but we all are. It just comes out a little differently. It is so important. So many things. I've finally in the last few years realized so many things can be cured just by getting a good night's sleep. Like I can't tell you, like before I learned that one, I'd be up all night trying to like fix the problem or figure it all out. But you are getting more and more exhausted and more down a rabbit hole of what ifs and everything else. You just need a good night's sleep. And if you can figure out how to do that, and I feel like this Alexander technique, by teaching you to go back to that state where you can be calm, probably helps you sleep so much better. And then you can begin again the next day. We're lucky. We get a fresh start. And that's a gift in itself as well, and just everything. I find a lot of things fall into place after a good night's sleep. It's
Absolutely. I absolutely am a believer that we get a fresh start every day. I think we are our own worst enemies. And when it comes to that, and I think often when people say, "Oh, this stuff was hanging over my head," I'll just gently ask the question, who was keeping that loop going? Did you really have to hold on to that? And sometimes reluctantly, people will say, "Oh gosh, I was perpetuating that. I wasn't giving myself the clean start
right.
because I was already waking up primed to go." Right.
Yeah.
So it can be a challenge. It can be a real challenge sometimes. But you're right. There are ways that we can all break those cycles.
It's true. And it's hard work, but it's important work. And it is so life-changing. And, and it's possible. Like you mentioned, we have all these things in us already. It's really tapping into them, just allowing ourselves to go there. I try to simplify it as much as I can. I used to just overcomplicate everything. It was like a, skill I apparently had, but it made everything harder. And at the end of the day, it's actually quite simple. Like just take a little break. Give yourself 10 minutes, have a cup of tea, just go sit. We were just talking before, we finally have a nice day. It's been a cold winter and we finally have a mild day and the sun is out. Let's all go enjoy that for a few minutes today and just sit in it. You don't have to be doing something. You don't have to be accomplishing anything. You're accomplishing quite a bit by just sitting there, actually. So, I think it's just recognizing that if we don't need to be productive all the time, but rest is productive because it's letting us be at our best. And that's so
Absolutely.
important.
And if anything, slowing down, a pause, however you want to look at that tactic, it's actually a pattern interrupt. So what we're doing is we're just creating a little bit of space for something else to potentially come in, potentially leave. Sometimes that's a good thing, but to just interrupt the pattern. And that can be really helpful. We were talking a little bit before we popped onto this conversation about how we were both analog people and we prefer that. But it's actually one of the reasons I still like making paper lists or writing things down by hand is because our body moves slower than our brain does. And so when we're writing something down, it actually forces our brain to slow down a little bit because we have to keep up with the pace at which we can write. And we can type faster than we can write. So it doesn't happen the same when you're doing it on a device or on a computer, but really pausing and looking at what happens when you're hand writing something out. There's research. We remember that.
Yep.
There's all sorts of different ways we can do this. And I'm certainly not suggesting you have to do all of your work by hand anymore. But when I was writing, I did a lot of writing physically by hand. I would write out notes. I would write on Post-its. I would write things. And it would be a really, really helpful way to coalesce because half the time I'd remember, oh my gosh, I remember. That's what I was looking for. That's what I wanted. And there's just enough space for something to sneak in.
Yep.
Yeah.
That is beautiful. I love that. There's so many good things to think about from this conversation, Lisa. Oh, I could talk to you all day. So maybe we'll do a part 2 at some point. We'll dive into some of these things a little bit more deeply, but I think you gave us a little taste of a lot of things that you do in your own life. But I'd love to ask people, what is one of your favorite ways or a couple ways that you love to slow down right now?
Well, it's funny. You mentioned it a little bit earlier. My morning coffee is one of my favorite routines that I was even with that getting in the habit of doing a really quick grab the coffee, walk around, get oriented, and I've really asked myself why I can't take the time to sit down and really be there, speaking of the sensation, with the warm mug, really enjoy the smell, really soak in all that space. And that quiet morning space has been really lovely for me. So that's definitely one way I slow down recently. It's very interesting. I've also realized that being in New York, I walk really fast and I talk really fast. So I am actually also trying to intentionally slow down my walking. Every New Yorker knows that there's a little joke about how long it takes to get somewhere, and we can always shave a few minutes off if we walk fast. So I'm trying to build in enough time that I don't have to do the New York walker trick. And trying to also speak a little bit slower, because when my brain starts moving really fast and I get excited about something, I just get a little carried away and then I stumble over my words, or I'm not thinking quite as clearly or succinctly as I would like to be. So those are two additional ways I'm very tangibly trying to slow down in my life right now, is in the walking trend and when I'm speaking with people, to just really make sure I'm giving enough space for both conversation and for myself to process, so I can be communicating in the ways that I choose.
So good. So good, Lisa. I want to encourage everybody. I have to say, Lisa so generously sent me her book, Embracing the Unknown. I really enjoyed reading it. I used to try to keep books perfect, but I'm like, nope, I mark them up. I dog ear things because I like to go back and I like the tangible paper. And I did mark it up a bit because there was a lot of really great things to think about in there. So I will certainly link that. But why don't you let everybody know where they can find you and your book and all that?
That would be great. So my website is just my name, www.lisadeangelis.com, and you can find out lots more information about me and my book. You can find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target.com, wherever you like to buy your books. I know we're all trying to be a little bit more intentional as well about supporting, small independent bookstores. And so I always encourage people to do that. Anne-Marie, I'd love to just give your listeners an offer that if they would like, they can get a 99-cent copy of my ebook off of my website. And I'll just give you a discount code for that we can post with this. And I'd love to just offer that up as well. So connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm taking a little bit of a social media hiatus at the moment. So I am on Instagram, Facebook, but not so active at the moment. I did just start a Substack, so that's kind of fun. I moved my writing over there, and it'll be interesting to see where that goes. I'm playing a little bit with what happens if I really stop getting stuck in the wheel of social media. It's been a little challenging. So another mini slowdown that I'm working on. Don't know what the end result of that is going to be quite yet, but it's a less dependable way to connect with me right now.
I love it. Oh, thank you, Lisa. I'm sure people are going to be interested in the e-copy, and I will make sure that everything is in the show notes for people to find really easily. So thank you so much for coming on today and talking with us.
This has been great. And thank you for your message, because truthfully, it is one of the simplest things we can do that has the most impact. So I'm here for it. Let's slow down.
Thanks, Lisa.
I hope you've enjoyed our journey together. Please take a moment to rate and review the show. It really helps us grow and reach others looking to slow down too. Wishing you simplicity and ease in your world, and I'll see you back here next week.